educational achievement has gone global, and that it's becoming a global priority, with everybody focused on what should be the same high set of expectations for every student and the youth of every nation. But at the same time, those needs are becoming ever more diverse. And I think that's the challenge for policymakers, is to find ways of shaping the state and action by government in order to drive improvement and consistent standards, while at the same time building the capability in our education systems to be different, to differentiate, to respond to individual needs and to social groups. In a public education system, it's very hard to produce dramatic and disruptive innovations. You can't suddenly collapse all the provision and say, we're going to do something entirely different. But of course, the lived reality continues to change on its own, and young people and also other organisations, the private sector, the social sector, can produce innovations which may offer higher quality experiences and greater educational opportunities. What you actually need is to find ways of setting out the long-term objectives and committing the authority and the legitimacy of governments and political leaders to achieving those long-term goals, and then at the same time try to open up the systems of delivery so that they become much more responsive to the people who are using them, the professionals, the families and the students, and much more capable of interacting with more dynamic innovations. When you study the quality of educational experience, it turns out that feedback between the student and the teacher is one of the most important influences of quality, and is one of the things that can produce better outcomes. But most of our education systems are not designed to work through that feedback. They have much slower levers and processes for sending signals about who should do what. So we have to find ways of radically increasing our transparency, so there's much more data and access to data, so that students and teachers and families and communities can understand and make sense of what's happening in our classrooms and in our school districts. And then we have to build the capabilities, both professional capabilities through professional skills and training and lifelong learning, and also institutional capabilities through new kinds of infrastructure, new learning and data systems, new forms of networking and collaboration, so that the larger scale institutions that run our education systems become capable of this continuous learning and adaptation. It's true that education systems reproduce inequality, and if you leave everything else the same, then they can make inequality worse because of the other trends in our world which have the same effect, which are driving towards the same destination. The fact is that people with resources will use them to claim new resources and to grab the opportunities that come from technological change and from economic change. And that's no different in education. In the main, most of our countries still have quite hierarchical education systems in which people can use achievement to join elites and to open up those opportunities arising from globalization. And it's very interesting that as you study what happens in different systems, you also begin to realize that education funding tends to travel towards schools that already have good reputations or which are serving middle and upper class populations who can claim and access those resources already. What you have to do, I think, is to try and do two things. One is to use transparency to really bring out the reality of what's happening and to show who is benefiting and who is not benefiting from the way that education currently works. That's one of the things that we have worked on very hard in Australia, to find ways of making the data accessible and linking the data about performance with the data about wealth and privilege and family background and the circumstance of students. Because when you combine those forms of data and when you put them in the hands of communities, then they can begin to take action themselves. And the second thing is to pursue empowerment, to try to put resources in people's own hands to create responses to their own situations. So I think that's another big lesson, again, about education reform. You need to try to make sure that resources are being put where they will benefit disproportionately. If you rely only on the system that you've got to channel resources, then it can only use the levers and the channels that it already has. And the process of allocating those resources becomes too slow and too fragmented. So a form of empowerment which enables people to generate their own innovations, which puts some of the resources directly in their hands, and which connects them to other holders of power in order to try to articulate their needs more clearly and to focus on their own experience, is likely to give you more kind of tools in the fight against inequality. It's a fight that's never going to be over, because our processes of economic and social change are constantly generating new conflicts and new patterns of change. But that's precisely why we have to kind of broaden out our range of investments and learn how to learn faster and incorporate the best of the innovation into our mainstream practice.